Here I am, and there you are. I wanted to show you my Kramer hair because I haven't had a chance to comb it this morning. I thought, well, it's online, so I don't have to be that presentable. So I didn't shave, didn't comb my hair. You know, no insult intended to street people, but I'm kind of looking worse than most I've seen today. But that's good. That's good. So uh, we have two major topics I want to talk to you about today. The first being try to alleviate those fears of poetry phobes. I'm afraid of poetry because I sit in class and everybody else seems to be getting all of this meaning from this poem and I don't get any of it. What's wrong with me? Was I dropped on my head when I was a baby? I don't know what happened. Maybe a lot of those people who are extracting meaning from the poem are doing a huge overkill, and maybe it didn't mean some of what they're saying it means, and they're going on and on about it. Did you ever think about that? I want you to think about that. I do want you to feel at ease with poetry, and it's a wonderful experience. I mean, to me, it's music on paper. A lot of it has to do with sound. You have an inner ear. You have an inner ear that can hear the sounds and the magnificent sounds and connections among the sounds in these poems. And that's why I'm hoping you are forming live poets groups. It could be 3 or 4 people in a cell, and you get 10 bonus points. Do you need bonus points? Look at me. Do you need bonus points? I hope you're forming some of these. I'll find out soon enough. All right. So the other topic I want to talk to you about very briefly today is your ongoing literary research paper. Number 1, it's not due until the end of the semester. Number 2, it's not one that can be rewritten. So I think those are important considerations. And the third one is this. What's most important is that you have a strong thesis. You have a strong argument throughout that essay. So I don't want you at this stage to dilute that by looking up what some literary critic said and then kowtowing to the literary critic. Oh, almighty literary critic, you must be right because you're enshrined in print. And who am I? I'm just some student. I don't know anything. You know something. You've got to back what you know. You already showed me you know quite a bit. All right, so in order to help you feel comfortable with what I'm going to expect, I'm going to talk about the poetry test, which will be cumulative. I'm going to talk about what I'm going to be looking for and how that's all going to come down. All right, so first of all, we talk about analyzing poetry. Is this an oxymoron? That is a combination of seemingly irreconcilable opposites like Microsoft works? Well, it seldom does. I have this feeling that the people who cooked up Microsoft 8 met in a room and they said, you know what, let's really put one over on them this time. I think there's a way that we can hide just about anything they need, like control panel and so on. I think we can hide it and make it more difficult for them to find it than it used to be. I think that would be a great trick. Let's do it. And so they did. Microsoft works. Oh boy. Well, you know what an oxymoron is. So this is the way I put it. What can I, meaning you, say about poetry? And it doesn't matter whether you see all this writing. I put it up here so that I can stay on track, which is difficult enough. So what can I, meaning you, say about poetry? Start with what you know. You know elements of short stories. You know lots of them. You know plot, theme, setting, point of view, tone. Oh my gosh, honor. So many of them. Symbol. There's a huge one. You already know these terms. Pretty much all of those terms apply to poetry. So don't forget what you know. Many poems have themes. Narrative poems even have plots. Not all poems, but many do. Certainly, most poems, I think you would say, have tone. Dispensing with the obvious, many poems don't rhyme. Thank God. And many poems are not sing-songy. And so when you read a poem, when you're in your live poetry groups, think about how the lines actually fit together, oftentimes conversationally. Okay? Anyway, so I'm going to submit to you that you can analyze poetry without putting it under a microscope and killing the essence of it. It's just basically adding meaning to meaning. The poem has inherent meaning, and you can appreciate the poem. What can you appreciate? Wow, how it works upon you. You can appreciate structural elements, certainly. We'll talk about those. You can appreciate levels of meaning. You can appreciate the words, the diction in poetry. Oh my heavens, it is magnificent. It is like dessert. So often, a poem is like a distilled, condensed, rich experience. It's almost as if, and Yeats, W.B. Yeats used to say, this is the way he wrote his poems. It's almost as if someone took prose, like an essay form, and they started with that, and they shrank it, and they shrank it, and they shrank it till they got just what was absolutely essential and powerful, and left only that. So anyway, so you already know these elements. You can apply these elements to a poem. Let's talk about this. We talk about levels of meaning. This is a great way to approach almost any poem. They have levels of meaning, different levels of meaning, just like stories in a building. They have different levels of meaning. And the first level we want to deal with is the easiest. It's literal. What is the poem saying? Well, on face value, I'm not trying to be fancy. I'm not trying to dig into, oh, there's a secret meaning, and this represents Jesus on the cross and all this. Oh, come on. What actually, on the face value of it, is the poem communicating? If we don't get to that, then we don't get to anything else much, really, do we? So we don't know what the poem is saying. So, literal first. So, stop the tape. Stop the video. Stop it right now. Read The Road Not Taken in your text. It's 5:55. We haven't assigned it yet. Read that. If you've never read, you probably have. The famous Robert Frost poem about two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. You see one thing? You know, sometimes when the poetry festivals are going on and students read poems, not all the time, and I'm not making fun. I'm not making fun. Sometimes they read them like, now stop at the end of each line and make something that really should flow together conversationally into something that is rather forced into a rhythm. Anyway, read it to yourself, read it aloud, take your time, think about it. Now do that now. Now stop everything, do that now, and then you can start it up again. I know you want to start it up right now, but don't do it. Read that. Okay. Have you done that? Okay, come back. All right, now we're back. So we want to talk about this poem and apply what I'll ask you to do. Because on the test, there are going to be two sections. One will be objective. That's holding you accountable for the essentials of the terms, for the essentials of key poems. I'm not going to ask you, well, what is the third line of "To His Coy Mistress"? You know, this kind of no, I'm not going to do that. So, in fact, before I give the test, I'm going to give you a list of poems that I wanted you to focus more upon than others. But right now, I'm not going to do that because I want you to read them all and enjoy them all. Okay, so we talk about the literal level first. And I want to get this term in. I put it there to remind myself. Persona. Most important term in all of this. That means that there is a speaker in a poem, right? And that speaker is not necessarily the poet. The most abused comment in student written papers is, well, Robert Frost was saying in The Road Not Taken. We don't know it's Robert Frost. Well, this one is probably closely identified with Robert Frost, sure. But we don't know that he is that person. You know, we don't know in Jabberwocky. Well, we do know it's not Lewis Carroll speaking. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toved at gyre and gimble and the wave. All mimsy were the Borgos and the mom ra sound grave. Sound makes sense. Now that makes sense to me. Does it make sense to you? If it doesn't, it's because you're not letting your child brain operate. Because the child brain says, oh, wow. You know, that's a swamp-like place, and it's a bog-like place. Because the sounds sound like that. Okay, leave that alone. Persona is the speaker in the poem, not necessarily the poet. Make that distinction. Literal level. So tell me, what's the literal level of that poem? Tell me right now. I'm listening. Did you tell me? Well, it does tell a story of sorts, doesn't it? About someone looking at two roads. And you can tell me about those roads. One of them wanted wear. In other words, it had a lot of growth. And the other one was more worn, wasn't it? Okay. So yeah, we can talk about which road the persona, speaker in the poem, took. We can talk about what those represent and so on. But first, we have to actually look at the poem and look at what it actually says on the literal level. So, took the other as just as fair and perhaps having the better claim. So really, they're equal. It's choice, isn't it? They're equal in a sense. They both have, let's just say, attraction, advantages. They're simply different. In leaves no equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Wow, what a line! I kept the first for another day, indicating, you can't go back. I took the one less traveled by. In other words, the one that didn't have as many predecessors that had walked on it. Right? So, I mean, you can talk about all this literally, and now you have a lot to say about the poem, don't you? Without even trying to be sophisticated, wise, or any of those silly terms that we can pass on. So then, open the bag. So here's the bag. This is the bag. This bag is full of what I can say about a poem. I can talk about the elements. I can talk about the levels of meaning. I can talk about the diction. I can talk about the structure. I can talk about the meter. So can you, when you get to that point. I can talk about how many stanzas it has. I mean, you notice all of this. It's a matter of being observant. It's not a matter of being someone who really loves poetry. Maybe you're majoring in engineering. Maybe you're majoring in physics and you're thinking, poetry? I don't need poetry. I just want you to keep in mind that poetry isn't for the effeminate, necessarily. There's a very famous story of the two famous Greek generals on their way to battle the Persian ships. And what are they doing? They're discussing nuances of poetry, right? Our love, Pericles says, our love of what is beautiful does not make us soft. In the funeral oration. Our love of what is beautiful does not make us soft. In fact, it makes us strong. And so poetry resonates inside of you. And if you memorize certain lines, it enhances that experience that you're having, whatever that experience is, right? So we open the bag and we look at possible levels of meaning. Well, there's a figurative level. That is a metaphoric level, is there not here? There's a symbolic level. There's a personal connection. Choices you might make as to career, as to school, as to spouse or no spouse, or whatever it happens to be. There are choices, and it's about those choices. And it really isn't a cliche, It's not just something you can simply explain away. So, Frost once was asked about what one of his poems meant, and he said, well, that's not something. I wrote the poem to show the meaning. I'm not going to go into detail and try to analyze and describe it, because I put it out there. It's a work of art. So are there levels? Well, sure. There is a figurative level, isn't there? There's a symbolic level. There's much to be said about the tone in the poem, isn't there? Because it really is not a tone that is deliberately strong, assertive, convincing, persuasive. It's almost a hands-off type of approach, and puts the reader indirectly in that position of looking at those choices, looking at those two roads. You can talk about the diction. You can talk about the word choice. Oh, should we go on? The line that I read to you is just a beautiful condensation and choice of words already. So you look at that. You can highlight those. You can learn from that. So you open the bag. You get involved in every possibility, and that doesn't mean you have to talk about every nuance of the poem, every detail of the poem. It simply means that you have a way in, literal first, and then you can go on to figurative, if there is one. Here's this poem. It's Wallace Stevens about the pear. He says, hey, it's just a pear. It's in a grocery store. Don't go on and on about it. Don't go off on symbolism. I don't want you to get all involved in all of that. But in any case, you should certainly do so. So now, test is going to be part objective, and I will give you the advance notice and direction on that. But I do want to keep you honest. I want to make sure that you're reading the poems. And you will have, on the test when we come to that point, you will have a fresh poem that I will give you. You may or may not have seen before, that you'll respond to in terms of being able to discuss the literal level and other levels, structural elements, whatever you want to bring into the discussion in terms of, yes, analyzing poetry. It's not really an oxymoron because you're adding meaning to meaning. You know, I just saw the movie The Judge. It got panned on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know why. I mean, I was really moved by that movie. But you know, that has psychological levels, just like many poems do. That has philosophical levels. That has personal levels. That has sociological implications. And I mean, this all fits together. It's too bad we have all these separations among disciplines, because if you want to write a good paper, I'm going to get to that now. Think about your other disciplines. Think about all these sociological, psychological, physiological, if you want, any logical you want, ontological, philosophical implications of that story that you're working on. Because when we talk about secondary sources, and we will be introducing secondary sources, and I'm going to ease you into that, there's a reason I haven't given you the whole spiel. It's because I want to ease you into the paper. So the next stage is going to be, as I already indicated, we're going to incorporate a second series of secondary sources, 3 of them. But that's going to be up to you. I'm just going to show you how you can do that. It's got to integrate into your paper. It's got to be woven into your paper. You don't just go find a literary critic and say, well, yeah, T.S. Eliot said this about the story I'm working on. Let's say The Yellow Wallpaper. You're not, but let's say that. And it doesn't relate to your discussion in your paper. No. It's part of the conversation. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. You don't have to use literary critics. I'm going to mention that. I'm going to show you how you can use literary critics. I'm going to show you how you can bypass that if you want to. It's really not that complicated. You're just simply adding to the conversation. Before you wrote a paper that presented your assertion, your thesis, your support for that. Now you're writing a paper that does that exact same thing. In addition, it incorporates others, meaning secondary sources. And a secondary source is any source that is not the story itself, right? And believe me, it's not some fly-by-night internet source. I've been seeing a few of those. Now, we're digging into something academic here, and we'll talk about how to do that later. All right. So in order to give you a little bit of advice to make sure you don't go astray on this, I'm going to say, don't summarize the story. Assume your reader already knows the story. This is just filler. The only time you're using summarized plot is to support a point that you are making, right? And if you want to know what your point of your paragraph is, why don't you just ask that? If you've written the paragraph and you get to the end of it, and if you ask yourself the question, what point am I trying to establish here? And how does that relate to my major point, my thesis? Then answer it. That's your topic sentence. Just answer your own question. Oh, it's not that difficult, is it? Really? Okay. So here's something, too, that I think you'll find helpful. No chronology. In essence, I mean, you could, but if you take away from yourself terms like, well, then this happened in the story. Then next this happened. And after that, you see what you're doing? All of a sudden, you got lured away. And you got lured into retelling parts of the story. Don't want it, don't need it, get it out of there. And one way to get it out of there on your tests and on your papers is to simply strike out words that have to do with next, after that, and so on, because we don't want to know that. Okay, well, that's really a lot to say. And you know what? I really wish I could talk to you in more detail about the poems, and maybe I'm doing this next semester. Maybe I'll figure out a way to do that. At this point, it seems, if there is an oxymoron, it's sort of living you on your own on the poems, because they're communal, they're shared, that they probably need to be discussed. That's why you need a Live Poets Society. Signing off, Live Poets.